Hey, I want to welcome everyone to the Fairfax August Luncheon. Melissa's sick today, couldn't make it, so I take her place. I'm Mike Martin. I'm board president of the FIA, and for our featured speaker for August, it's Senator Moran, which we're honored to have him here today. We also want to thank Blackjack Tire for hosting the event, along with Fairfax Drainage District and Gus's Chicken for lunch sponsors for today. Some of the announcements is coming up in September 12th is our next luncheon. It's going to be held at Giving the Basics site up on 7th Street. And Giving the Basics is a nonprofit organization that works with, that helps people on government assistance with everyday supplies such as laundry soap, deodorant, toilet paper, and other personal care projects. So this is going to be the launch of the Fairfax fundraiser for Giving the Basics, and also Mayor Alvey will be speaker at September's lunch. We are still looking for sponsors for the lunch in September. If you're interested in it, get with Rachel after this meeting, or you could also hit the website at fiakck.org to sign up for it. Okay, in October 3rd is our festival event. Melissa's been talking about this for several months now. Richard's not here to kind of talk about it, but there's still sponsorships available for the October festival. Talk with Rachel or hit the website for it. We're looking for platinum, gold, and silver sponsors for the event. Also at the event, we're going to end up with boat rides. There's also, we've got different displays there. And the Zeros are going to be the band that's going to play. So they're well known as a local cover band, will be at the event. And also Joe Nichols will be there as a co-MC along with Rachel. Okay, in November, our luncheon's changed. It's going to be on a Wednesday. It's going to be November 3rd, and Esther George, who's president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, will be speaker at the event. And in December, we're going to have a happy hour at the Argosy Casino for all FIA members. It's a free event. That's going to be on Thursday, December 5th. And all these dates and other information is available on the website. So, as we normally do, we kind of go around and everyone gets a chance to introduce themselves along with their company name. So if we want to start that right now, Steve, would you want to start?
Steve Daly with the Fairfax Drainage District and also a board member for the FIA. Whitney Kerr, Christian at Wakefield Real Estate. Marty Quinn, industrial lumber, board member and board member of the Fairfax Drainage District. Chris Waters, property Brendan Quinn, Charter Griffin, here in Industrial.
Ken Gainey, American Equipment Company.
Festival Committee, Finance Committee, and I'm going to take credit for inviting the Senator here today.
Paul Bush, First State Bank and Trust.
Brent Latham, First State Bank and Trust.
Lady Kylie, Pentecostal.
Chuck Santos. Dan Doty, Delta Innovative Services.
Jamie Strong, Exxon Mobil. Desmond Jones, Exxon Mobil. Kate Kershaw,
Christian Taylor, I speak over a distributor for Parker Benefit, and we're the new Preston building right down the street, so it's been great getting in the neighborhood and getting to change some people. So,
Mayor Brock with our CPC original spot.
Kelly with West Side Company and hello everyone, Sandra with Investment Bank of Lake.
First National Bank of Omaha.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Leslie Smith with Universal Construction of KCK.
Zach Smith, Universal Construction.
Paul Docker, Consumer Solutions FIA Board Member. Mike Docker, Best Business Solutions. Solutions.
Carlos Diaz, Board of Public Utilities and FIA Board Member.
Innovative, United by background.
Ed Hubert, Solar Side Up.
Valerie Vaughn, Investment Advisors. Cindy Meyer, Process Triage.
Samantha Howell, Import Services Sagan.
Morning, Tim Cruz with E3 Ball.
Goes all the way to the back.
Pam Martin, Lever One.
Steve Erickson, UMB.
Don Parker with Black Cat. Serena Parker with Black Cat.
Frank Williams with Black Cat.
Go start.
Steve Owen, Captain of the Kansas Police Department. Roger B. with us today also. Cultural Community Police Officer for this.
David Allen, Mayor of the Unified Government.
Lynn Bell, Assistant Mayor.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'm Dan Burton, Senior Career Outlook, and also a FIA alumni.
Dan Reardon Jr., Reardon Power. Jason Kane, Reardon Power.
Dylan, Key on the electric.
Tara Law, so far, Jacob.
Ethan Melhawk, Kansas City Board of Public Utilities.
Bill Johnson, Kansas City Board of Public Utilities.
Good, sir.
I'm Jordan Moran, I represent FIA, United States Senate.
Go ahead.
Danny Phillips with Ray Lumber Millwork.
Hatch, Grant, with Red River Works.
I'm Jake Brown, Austin Motors. David Dean, Blue Hat Train, Kansas City.
Brett Seamarsh, Blue Hat Train, Kansas City.
Nicola Wilson, Estuary Incorporated.
Hi, I'm David Drew, Highway Express with
Smith Packaging Systems.
Okay, we've got a big crowd today. I think we had about 95 registered. You got one?
Hey, I'm Steve Zidoni with Investment Strategy, and I just want to say thank you. We're new members a couple months ago, and thanks for having us out.
Okay. Hey, do you want to say anything else? We had you down for a little bit later.
12 seconds and I'm done.
You can go 30.
So we're doing all of this on site. We've got our local frying unit outside. We've got 8 banks and fryers. We've got 14 on reserve, and we can cook for up to 2,000 people on site. So any company events, anything we're doing, first, second, third shifts out here, we can go 24 hours a day on site to keep your employees. And our restaurant's at 47 Mission Road. It's over by the Joe's Barbecue, the original gas station, so that's where our store is. So feel free to call for any company events. We'd love to. So thank you. Thanks again.
Okay, thanks. Rachel, are you here? Okay, when you came in, you probably would have gotten a green dot. And what we're doing, there's posters over here on the wall that's made for the Fairfax Festival that comes up in October. It's use that dot to vote for your favorite poster. And the winner, I believe, gets a $500 prize for the poster, and that's going to be displayed at the festival that's coming up. So if you don't get a dot, then see Rachel or Carlos to go from there. All right, Steve, do you want to talk river update?
So I was noticing somebody with a dot on their own self. It wasn't me. I started to put it there, just like Congressional Forum. You put a dot on your. So real quick, my name is Steve Daly, and I'm the general manager of the Fairfax Drainage District. And also we have a board member represented here, Marty Quinn. He's on the FIA board, has been there for quite a few years. What I wanted to do today, rather than just give a little talk about the Fairfax Drainage District, is just throw some numbers your way. We've been very busy since March. In fact, we have not stopped operating pumps since March the 15th. So 194 days of continuous pump station operation. We're not pumping as much water now as we were, but we still have 3 or 4 stations online today. We took 2 of them offline today. I'm especially grateful for my workers that have worked around the clock for about 50 of those days, 24/7. In 2 shifts. Also, I wanted to take this opportunity to personally and publicly thank Senator Moran, who has supported the Kansas City levees projects that have been going on since the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006 till now. For us, for Fairfax, that meant strengthening the BPU flood wall, which was determined to be have a high degree of risk of failure should the river come to the top of it. Well, that wall has been strengthened and an underseepage system installed to put it up to where it should be, and now not be operating in the safety factor. So anyway, thank you very much, Senator Moran, for all that support. That's huge. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention our partner during that strengthening, that rehabilitation project. If I didn't acknowledge BPU's participation, they funded, of the local cost share, it was all told was about a $10 million project. 35% of that was paid locally, but BPU shared in the cost of that 75% of the 35%. So we appreciate BPU's participation in that as well. Let me see if I have any more numbers here for you. I know this, that in March 25th, a record was set for the highest river stage in the month of March. In June, though, June the 2nd, the second highest June recording was made, and that was a river stage of 36.6. So it was about 4 feet up on the levee slope at that time. That's where it crested. Since then, it's been up and down, but never higher than that. Today, it's at 21.5, so it's continuing to fall. I've tried to keep you all notified periodically, especially when the river was high, so that you would have updates of what we were doing and any issues that we experienced. We have had a few issues. They're being addressed. Nothing really with the levee, but some sinkholes and some major pipes here in Fairfax we're addressing. Since the president declared this area a state of emergency, a disaster area, we are in the process of applying for some reimbursement of funds that otherwise we would have to pay ourselves, like overtime, power usage, and any other things that have occurred, like these sinkholes. So I think that's it. Mike, if you ever have any questions or would like a personalized levee tour, give me a holler and be glad to show you what we got. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. Our next speaker is Senator Moran, and Senator served 7 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives before being elected to the Senate in 2010. He was re-elected in 2016. We're currently on the Senate Appropriations Committee and chairman of the, this is a mouthful, of the Commerce.
You can just say there's Jerry Moran.
Okay. Please welcome Jerry Moran.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Soon to be good afternoon. Thanks for allowing me to join you here at Fairfax Industrial Association. I'm glad to be back, and I'm anxious to have a conversation with you. I noticed as I walked in, while I have a suit and tie on, that I have tennis shoes on, and several people noticed that and looked at my feet. I know this is a casual gathering, so I thought that was my opportunity to be casual, but I broke my ankle, and I tried yesterday so hard to get a pair of shoes on, dress shoes on both feet, so I gave up on the good foot and put tennis shoes there, and I've got a tennis shoe on the bad foot. If you don't know this story, you should, because it made social media and national news. The helicopter that I thought was there to rescue me, when I was on Camelback Mountain in Arizona, I made it up. I didn't quite make it down in the fashion that I'd intended, and there was a helicopter flying above me, and I thought, that's my way off the mountain. No, that was Channel 5 Phoenix News filming me. So there is a video of me. I don't know whether they got me falling down, but they got me coming down. I was pleased that helicopter was not there to rescue me, because a couple days later there was a video that went viral of a lady being rescued off of Camelback Mountain, and the gurney started spinning. She just was, as they lifted her up, it just looked awful. Senator Richard Burr is a senator from North Carolina. He has the video, has shown everyone he can show the video of Moran on the mountain, coming down to the mountain, and his question then is, how many people does it take to get Moran off the mountain? To which the answer is 13. I'm a great fan of firefighters these days, but 13 firefighters put me in a gurney with a wheel on the bottom, and we bounced down the mountain. One of my colleagues from Virginia, Senator Mark Warner, saw me in the United States Senate on the floor in a wheelchair, and he says, Moran, this is the first time you actually look like a senator. I'm making progress. This is the first week without crutches, and I just have a bit of a hitch in this foot when I walk. But I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be in Kansas City, Kansas. Great to be here with the mayor. He and I ran into each other by happenstance. He was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, and then we ran into each other by happenstance at a gas station in Quinter, Kansas this week. So, Mayor, great to be back with you. Nice to see the officers that are with you. One of the subcommittees that I chair in appropriations is funding of the Department of Justice, including grants for local law enforcement, and we've been working hard at developing a solid working relationship with law enforcement in Wyandotte County, and working to see that the tax dollars that we all pay, at least a fair portion of them, come back to Kansas to increase the opportunity for our security and safety, and I pay tribute to you and honor to you. I'd mention veterans just for a moment in hopes that I can be of help to you. I am not a veteran. I graduated from high school at a time in which the Vietnam War had come to an end. Just a few years before my graduation, I have classmates, high school classmates, who served in Vietnam, and I saw how they were treated when they returned, and I've worked hard at, I remember telling myself as a 16-year-old kid, I'm going to do everything I can to treat with respect those who served our nation. I never expected to be a member of the United States Senate. I now have the responsibilities of doing something more than just showing respect. And one of those things is our ability to get health care where our veterans live. And I worked with Senator McCain before his death, and a new law that President Trump signed into law, became law on June the 6th, is called the Mission Act. And the reason I raise this topic with you, for any of you who served our country or know anyone who served, who could use my help, you can now access care closer to home or in a hospital or healthcare setting if it is in your best interest. So the law has been changed. We're not undermining the VA, but the VA now is required to provide medical services to veterans if it is in their best interest to have that care someplace, not necessarily in the VA hospital. And I raise this topic because I would tell you of a veteran in Bonner Springs who needed a kidney transplant, and the VA told him the only place you're going to get a kidney transplant from us is on an East Coast VA hospital. And his request was, could we please have that care provided at the University of Kansas, 15 miles from where I live, where I have great faith in the quality of the transplant, and I'm close to home and with my family. And previously, the answer to that question would have been no. Now, under this law, the answer is yes, if it is in that veteran's best interest. And that best interest has got lots of definitions in the law, but most importantly, it is decided by the veteran and his or her healthcare provider at the VA hospital, at the VA center. So a mid-level or doctor, a person who is responsible for caring for the veteran, and the veteran decide what is in his or her best interest. It is not a hospital administrator, it is not a bureaucrat within the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we now have the opportunity to care for veterans closer to home in the setting that may very well be in their best interest. A belief that KU could provide a kidney transplant better than a VA hospital someplace else, and an opportunity to be close to family. My hometown of Plainville, little town north of Hays, Kansas, on the other side of this kind of issue is just access to care at home. There is no VA hospital in the 1st Congressional District of Kansas where I come from, and yet it's larger, that district is larger than the state of Illinois. And so my example from hometown, Vietnam veteran, is Larry, who calls to say, Jerry, I used to tell people he told me he wanted a colonoscopy, and no one believed my story. So he must have said he needed a colonoscopy. So Larry called to say, Jerry, I need a colonoscopy, and I'd like to have it done here at home. Why would I need to drive 3.5 hours to Wichita for a colonoscopy? Well, we have an outpatient clinic in Hays to provide routine services for veterans, and the law used to say that you had to live more than 40 miles from a VA facility to get community care. That's now done with, but an example of how it used to work and the way it shouldn't work, Larry calls the VA in Wichita and says, I need a colonoscopy. I don't want to drive to Wichita. Could I just have it done here in my hometown clinic and hospital? And the answer was, no, sir, I'm sorry, you don't qualify. You live within 40 miles of Hays, and therefore you're not entitled to community care. And Larry says, but that shouldn't be a problem. I've called the clinic in Hays, the VA clinic in Hays. They don't perform colonoscopies. And the answer was, I'm sorry, sir, you live within 40 miles of a VA clinic. It is trying to get rid of the stuff that makes no sense and bring services closer to home. And we also can support our hometown hospitals and healthcare delivery system. This is not just about a hospital, it's about physicians, it's about pharmacists, it's about audiologists, it's about optometrists, all ways that we can support businesses in Kansas City, Kansas with the VA, with a veteran being able to utilize care if it's in his or her best interest. And I raise this topic at every opportunity in hopes that I can, again, some veterans may have tried this program before it was changed, and they're kind of fed up with it. We do not want the VA to win this battle and say that this program is not something that is valuable to veterans across Kansas and across the country. And to those of you who serve, thank you very much. I'm honored to be with you. This is a special place, this Fairfax Industrial District, and it is certainly an amazing thing in the country, and I think it's too often forgotten, even in our home state of Kansas, what has developed in Wyandotte County over a long period of time with major businesses, but more importantly, major employers that create opportunities for citizens of this part of Kansas to locate here and to work here and to have high-paying jobs with very respectable companies. I never would have expected the Blackjack Tire Shop to be this. I was expecting something different. In case I had a flat tire, I knew where I was coming. And I also know that most of you are not here to hear me speak. You are here because of the food that was provided. And it was great to hear the story of a new business joining your association. I would highlight for you that we do pay a lot of attention to water issues, to BPU issues. We're trying hard to be an ally of the citizens of Wyandotte County, but as in this Fairfax district, trying to create opportunities for more businesses to come here and for businesses that are here to expand and to stay. And a lot of factors go into location of where employers decide to create employment. And we want Kansas City, Kansas, we want Fairfax to be a place that is an easy determination by those who have a business to say this is the place to be. And anytime any of you have suggestions of how we can be of help, please let me know. As I said earlier, a lot of our focus has been with BPU. Utility rates matter, and we've lived in a time in which BPU has been under lots of restrictions, lots of mandates on how they are to provide electricity, and that has a huge consequence upon the cost of that electricity. And then on the water side, I come from the part of Kansas in which there is no water. I've discovered there's a lot of water here. Most of my life, the issues have been drought. Here too often the issues are floods or potential floods, and we are working hard to develop a relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers in which they are helpful to us. And most recently we were successful including the levees in WRDA, the Water Resources Development Act, and we were able to convince the Corps of Engineers and to combine the levee issues, the levee projects in Kansas City into one package, so that it's not a series of steps that we have to go through more than once, and that when it's funded through the appropriations process, the money then becomes available for the entire project, not one project at a time. And so there's a couple of things in which we are particularly pleased about for the Fairfax district. I would mention in broad terms from an economic point of view, I think one of the most significant things that we can do in the nation's capital, and this rests initially in the House of Representatives, is we need to pass the replacement for NAFTA. USMCA, President Trump and his administration negotiated a new trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Mexico has ratified that new agreement, USMCA. Canada has not yet, but the United States hasn't either, and it's resting with Speaker Pelosi. By law, that agreement has to originate in the House of Representatives, and we've been encouraging businesses to contact their U.S. representatives to make certain that they are encouraging Speaker Pelosi to bring this to a vote in the House of Representatives. Those who are experts and who have dealt with NAFTA in the past indicate that USMCA, the new agreement, is slightly better, is modestly better than what we've had in the past. But I would tell you from a Kansas point of view, we earn a living here by what we export around the globe. Our ability to have success and profitability is determined by not just the market down the street, but the market around the world. Mexico is the #1 purchaser of agricultural commodities from Kansas, and Canada is the #1 purchaser of manufactured goods from Kansas. That agreement is hugely important to our state. So huge economic issue is we need those trade agreements. We at some point in time need to, as quickly as possible I would say, need to get ourselves out of this tariff battle with China. Our ability again for a growing economy is determined by what we sell elsewhere, and while China misbehaves consistently in their trading relationship with us, and we have every reason to try to hold them accountable, there is huge consequences to this trade battle. And while the president tweeted that if you don't like the tariffs that he imposed against China, just don't buy anything from them, that's something we all could do. But the challenge is, how about the people, the businesses who sell to China? And that market is significantly diminished, agriculture, manufacturing, and otherwise. So trade would be at the top of my list. I also would say, and I've served on the Environment and Public Works Committee 2 years ago, and that committee has just passed its version of a new highway transportation bill. Again, we'll be working to try to make certain that about 90+% of the money that comes from the federal government for transportation and infrastructure goes through a formula based upon highway miles and population, a whole set of factors. Our goal is always to make certain that Kansas that the formula is as fair and treats us as best it can, Kansas, as best as it can, so that more dollars come our way. But our infrastructure is in desperate need of investment, of new resources, and I'm hopeful that this is an example of an issue that Congress can come together, Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, and the administration, to get us an infrastructure bill through the Congress and invest in our infrastructure. Those of us who live and work in this part of the country, the middle of the country, we have the most at stake, because how efficiently, how cost effective we get our manufactured goods to market is determined by transportation. That's determined by infrastructure. We compete in a global economy, and our ability to do things efficiently determines whether or not we get those customers outside our region. So a couple of things that are pending, but I think perhaps the most important thing I could do is ask for any comments or questions or suggestions you have for me. Well, thank you very much. Anything?
Senator, if you could tell us, if you were the Senate Majority Leader, what would be your top 3 priorities if you swap roles with Senator McConnell? And what would be maybe break a few things loose in Washington?
Well, your final comment was where I was going to take, my brain is not as sharp as to come up with 3 items, but I could come up with 1, and I would start with this priority. We need leaders that pull us together. We need to be able to accomplish more. We need to help reduce the cynicism that Americans have about government and its inability to get things done. I have no interest in being in the United States Senate if we're not going to accomplish things. There's plenty of people in this room who don't know a lot about me, but there's nothing in my background that would suggest I would be a member of the United States Senate. I'm a first-generation college graduate. My dad was a laborer in the oil fields. My mom was the lady who paid your light bill too in our little town. I happen to be a kid who was fascinated by history and government, and I became a summer intern for my congressman, and kind of one thing led to another. As Americans, we pursue our dreams, and sometimes we have had success thanks to the help of other people. But to arrive in the United States Senate to learn that we didn't have much of an agenda, or we weren't going to do anything, or we couldn't get along well enough to accomplish anything, that's not appealing to me at all. The idea of being a senator because I have a pretty nice office and my name's on a door is inadequate for my satisfaction about the job that you've all allowed me to have. So I want this place to work. There are certainly differences in our country, and the country is very divided as well, but there are plenty of opportunities for us to come together, and instead, too often, we go to our corners and we try to make political points as compared to resolution of issues. I'm working hard to get the appropriations process to work. County government here has a budget. They figure out how much money to appropriate. Your school board has a budget, figure out how much money to appropriate. Congress struggles every year just to do what would be something we would consider very basic about governing. So I would start with, and I would say this, the reason that you ask about Senator McConnell, I would say this about Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell. I think there are plenty of instances when they see their job as to trying to make sure that their party gets or retains the majority. And I certainly like being in the majority more than I like being in the minority. I've certainly done both. But many members of Congress, it's more about getting results. And I actually think that you are rewarded at the ballot box whenever you can, instead of making a political point, when you actually can deliver something that's important for your constituents and for the country. So I'd love to see a different kind of approach to the way that we work or don't work. I also would say it's not as bad as it seems. The media loves the fight. On things that are not huge issues, Congress is pretty capable of working together. Almost every piece of legislation that I introduce in Washington, D.C., certainly with the hope of it becoming law, I'll find a Democrat to team up with me and we'll modify the legislation so that he or she gets what they need and I get what I need to get a piece of legislation that would make a difference in Kansans or Americans' lives. And the Senate needs to work in that way because the rules require that for anything to pass the Senate, it takes 60 votes. There are not 60 Republicans. There's never been 60 Republicans in the United States Senate. So the necessity of coming together is clear unless you just want to spend your life playing politics. I used to like politics. I'd like it a lot less today than I used to. Yes, sir.
Senator, I just want to thank you on behalf of the Board of Public Utilities. You have always made time for us whenever we come calling, and you have always had strong support, whether it be environmental issues, transmission issues, water issues, and even the fact that your history goes back to your mom working at the local.
Well, there you go. Right.
You even take in mind the customers. So I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Hello, sir. I'm all right, as far as I know.
I just like to ask you, I was a youngster when Dewey, Truman the time was Dewey won the election, which he did. And it didn't have the controversy we have today, which is so polarizing. We touched on it a little bit, but do you think, honestly, you want to go back to the times we're not that polarized in this country? Because if it keeps getting worse, we're headed for destruction, I think.
I remember, I was not living at the time, but I do remember reading the headlines of that historic election in which Dewey was expected to win and Truman did. And one of the things that highlights is that's different today than it was then is that elections were generally seen as resolving. The outcome of an election was respected. In my time in the Senate in particular, President Obama was president. I had constituents who would ask me, why haven't you impeached President Obama? And then there's another set of constituents today who want to know, why haven't you impeached President Trump? My point is, why can we not have the days that we used to have in which an election was a time for us to determine who we wanted our leaders to be, and then we spent the next, in the case of a president, the next 3.5 years trying to help that president succeed, and then we might spend the next 6 months trying to figure out who the next president should be. Should we re-elect this person, or should we try somebody new? But there was a coming together. Elections meant that people showed up at the polls, they made their positions known, and then once that was determined, they respected the decision. And today, it seems to me that we just want to continue having the battle about whether or not a person should be the person that we elected. It is very divisive, it pulls us apart. I can tell in most of the town hall meetings that I have, in a sense, who they voted for president determines the kind of questions they ask and what kind of attitude they have toward policies today. I don't think that used to be the case. You know, I came from Ellis County. Like Wyandotte County, we used to be the county in Kansas that was the Democrat county, the two of us. Wyandotte and Ellis always were in those days we didn't have colors, but were the blue counties. But I would tell you that once we had an election, we didn't spend all of our time then arguing about Republicans and Democrats and who should have won. And I miss the days in which things were determined. Your question was, will it ever change? I don't know how to necessarily explain why it is what it is. I think our media pulls us apart. We each have our brand of television news that we watch, and it informs the way we look at things. Social media is not helpful. If you're communicating with me by Facebook, I do not read my comments. The way people say things on comments, and incidentally, I don't think they're Kansans, I think they're Russians. But the way people say things on Facebook is unlike any experience I've had in meeting a Kansan. I stick my hand out on an ongoing, everyday basis. People I've never met, I'm in circumstances in which I don't know where a person, what their thought process is or their politics, and we have a good, solid conversation, even in disagreement. Social media is a place that people seemingly think they can say whatever they want with no consequence. I remember before, really, Facebook, we had when the email became so common, kind of the worst communication I ever had then as a congressman was from a teacher in my hometown, in a teacher of my kids. And this letter, this email was just scathing, and it had something to do with an environmental issue in a national park. I remember that. And I went to parent-teacher conference at home in Hayes, and I went to see the teacher who had sent me the email. And I said, is this what you meant to say? Is this the way that we teach our kids to communicate with people? Oh my gosh, Jerry, I never had any idea you would see that. Just a sense that we can say things, and I understand about blowing off steam, that's all fine, but how we treat each other, if we don't do it correctly, the way we were raised, it pulls us apart, it doesn't bring us together. And this may sound odd coming from somebody who is an elected official, but I think we focus way too much on politics. We're forgetting the things that are much more important: family, school, church, the bowling league, the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, the things that a community, and I think that Kansas City, Kansas is a good example. Kansan communities are good examples. We know in our communities kind of people's politics. We know what church they go to, kind of what makes us the same or different. And yet we're all in something together. There are things that pull us together as compared to always pull us apart. And this country desperately needs the kind of attitude and approach that you have in Wyandotte County, that generally we're pulling in the same way because we know we have so many challenges that if we spend all of our time arguing with each other and fighting, we'll get nothing done. And you know, none of this is perfect, but we need to make certain that politics is, we have focused so much attention on politics, and it's the one thing that seems the most divisive that does pull us apart. Politics and who we elect is important, but there are so many things that, that make a bigger difference in our lives than whether we're a Republican or a Democrat. And I think well, thank you. I think I interrupted the applause with my own words. That's a terrible mistake on my part. But I think that your question is, will it ever change? If the American people decide they want to elect people who have a different approach than the fight, then it will change. So I don't think that necessarily Washington, D.C. is not reflective of people. We're a divided country, and Congress reflects the division that exists across America. I wish I was the most popular United States Senator out of 100. So if you take a poll and you ask Kansans or you ask Missourians or you ask the people from California, how do you rate your senator? Do you like him or her, or do you not? The highest rated senator in the country is certainly not me, it's Bernie Sanders. In Vermont, his constituents think he is the best. And so my point of that is that there is a division about how we look at things, and there may be Bernie Sanders or others in this room, supporters in this room. That's not my point. Generally, Bernie Sanders and Kansans would not have the same point of view. But in this case, the people of Vermont think he's doing a great job, and it's exactly what they want. We have a very diverse country, and we need to figure out how we pull together. When I was a House member, a congresswoman from Connecticut came to me on the House floor, and the Democrats had just taken the majority of the U.S. House of Representatives, and she says to me, Congressman Moran, I understand that you know and care about agriculture. Would you please come visit with me? I just became the chairperson of the Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee. Rosa DeLaura is from New Haven, Connecticut, the home of Yale University, the suburbs of New York City that dominate that part of Connecticut. And for the time that the Democrats were in the majority, which was 4, 5, 6 years, she was the most important person in determining how money was spent in agriculture in the House. I went to her office a few days later and sat down to talk about agriculture. And I talked a little bit about agricultural research or crop insurance, the Farm Bill. And she's very animated. She goes, in a few minutes into that conversation, it's, no, Jerry, that's not what I need to know. Could you just tell me, what does a farmer do? So I'm not making fun of Rosa. In fact, I'm complimenting her because she asked the question. But to us, it's kind of a funny thing. What does a farmer do? And my point is that here is a very progressive, liberal Democrat from New Haven, Connecticut, still in the House of Representatives, and a pretty conservative Kansas Republican, and we're trying to figure out how we make things work together. That doesn't happen often enough. My suggestion to her was, well, why don't you come to Kansas and see what a farmer does? And she accepted. I had this plan, this highway will not mean anything to you, to have her visit a farm along Highway 27. That's the highway that runs along the Colorado border from St. Francis to Elkhart. And it would be an eye-opening experience for most Kansans, as desolate and rural as it is. Her question was, well, could we just meet at an airport? We met at Little River, Kansas, population 500, where we met at Cheryl's Cafe, had cheeseburgers and coconut cream pie. I was pleased to see she wasn't a vegetarian. And a local farmer picked her up at his pickup, took her by the high school, picked up his kids, and we spent the afternoon at Kendall Hodson's farm with him and his neighboring farmers explaining crops and equipment to Rosa DeLaura from New Haven, Connecticut. It's the kind of stuff that can happen, but doesn't happen often enough. And incidentally, we had her at the state fair the next day where 4-H kids showed her their exhibits. They were the best ambassador to connect with Rosa DeLaura than any of us. Those kids talking about their life, state fair, exhibits, and farm or rural. So we have ways that we can connect. It just doesn't happen, and we need the American people to demand that we behave differently. Yes, sir.
All right, my name is Chairman. Could you contrast your perspective of working in the House of Representatives with working in the Senate, and why you went from one to the other? Was it a stepping stone?
I don't know where I'd step next. Maybe just back. I don't know. Back away. I served for 14 years in the House of Representatives. It was a good experience. But I thought the Senate would be something different. It's a bit about what we're talking about. Historically, the Senate has been about 100 senators who are pretty independent, who have to come together to solve problems, but they each have certain, under the rules of the Senate, have certain abilities to make a greater difference, in my view. The House was very much about a Republican set of members and a Democrat set of members, and the rules of the House, whoever is in the majority controls whatever legislation comes to the floor. In the United States Senate, any senator, we operate by unanimous consent. That means it's pretty difficult to get anything done in the Senate, but it means that I have, not on my own behalf, but on your behalf, a greater set of tools to try to force issues that we care about in Kansas. Again, while I mentioned Bernie Sanders on the East Coast, there's also a West Coast. We folks from the middle of the country are in a minority. But the rules of the Senate are designed to protect the minority. And I at least knew that from high school government and maybe what I learned in college. And I knew a little bit about it from experience. But over time, the Senate is becoming more like the House and less like the Senate of the past, in which it becomes more about the leader of the Republican Party, the leader of the Democrat Party, who are trying to corral their members to behave as a unit, as compared to each of us as a bit of independent operators on behalf of our states. And so I think I was late in getting to the United States Senate to envision, to experience the kind of roles that United States Senator plays. Two topics about that. I would guess that anyone of a certain age in this audience, they miss the days that Bob Dole was their senator. I experienced that regularly. My wife has told me, Jerry, why couldn't you have been elected to the United States Senate when senators were actually respected? So again, I got there too late for kind of the way that the Senate used to be. And part of my job, while it's certainly about legislation, I care a lot about the way the institution, the reason I care about this is the Constitution matters. The Constitution protects us, and it requires a strong, independent legislative branch. The creators, the founders of our country knew that every executive, because they experienced the King of England, they knew that every executive of the United States, every president would try to capture more power, do more things. And while doing things, as I said, is a good thing, doing things also takes away citizens' freedoms and liberties. Government becomes too big. Government intrudes in too many ways. And it is Congress, under our Constitution, that is the bulwark, is the thing that is there to protect the citizens. And I recognize that none of you probably like the Congress. Many of you may not like your senator or congresswoman or man, but we are as close to what you have to make a difference on your behalf in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, and it is the Constitution that gives us that authority to act. And when we fail, when we acquiesce with the president or the executive branch, it reduces the freedoms and liberties that Americans enjoy. And so this is all that sounds academic, but there's huge consequences to a Congress that doesn't do its work. And it's called bigger government, less responsive government, and it's a reduction in the freedom and liberty that our children will enjoy as citizens of the United States. Yes, ma'am. The question was about the shootings in the country. This has certainly been an ongoing. I'm happy to have this conversation because I'm anxious to hear and to understand what it is that we think would work. First of all, I'm interested in what they're calling red flag laws. This is the idea that if you know somebody that may be a threat to him or herself or others, that there's a process. In my view, it requires due process because of the Constitution, but there's a process by which that person could be restrained, guns taken away from, that kind of thing. And I think of that in a we pay a lot of attention to domestic violence. There's a lot of circumstances in which knowing that somebody might be a threat, demonstrating that somebody might be a threat, could maybe save a life or more. So that's a start. Does that solve anything? The reason I'm comfortable with that is that Kansas has, we have laws that says if a person is dangerous to themselves or others, they can be committed for mental health treatment against their will. This seems to me to be a similar kind of step in which we're trying to protect a person's life or the people that they are surrounded by. I think there's a question that we have to resolve as to what form of weapon does the Second Amendment apply to. That's another aspect that there is certainly concern that once we go down this path that our freedoms will be diminished, because it's an easy one to say, well, this gun and then that gun and this armed ammunition clip. The background checks I have voted for and have worked to implement greater knowledge and truthfulness to the background checks. We had a circumstance we have circumstances in which state and local law enforcement, others, in this case the Air Force, didn't report to the central computer about the violation, the violent behavior of the person who had the gun. So strengthening the background check is something that I'm interested in doing. Here's the dilemma that I face, and it has a bit to what I said earlier. I don't know how you would, even if it was constitutional, I don't know how you would ban guns. Guns are everywhere. We simply create a black market in which guns are acquired. They exist. Beyond that, how do you change people's behavior? It is not just about guns, but it's about how do we raise kids? We need greater respect. We need to train people to love and have compassion, not to bully, not to despise, not to have, to nothing but to love and care for other people. And somehow that's what's missing, I think, in all these circumstances. You can remove the weapon, but we still have too many people who have hate in their heart and have no respect for other people. And that's the thing I don't know how to fix. And it's the thing that is the most important in changing behavior. So while guns can be an implement for acting out violence or acting out hatred or racism or whatever, it is the underlying problem that seems to have grown over time that we don't know how to solve. Part of that can be, and in my view should be, and I've been supportive of this, greater, and I see that the administration in Topeka is now proposing more resources going toward mental health. It's generally a state or local issue, but I want to be an ally of that effort. We need greater mental health resources, but beyond having the professional who can counsel somebody, what is it that we do as human beings that change the lives of other people so that they are caring, compassionate, loving of other people? And this is me as a human being, it's not me as a politician, not me as an elected official. Here's my view of life. We change the world one soul at a time. And it happens in families and churches and schools every day. And we've got to strengthen that process. And instead we have too many instances of people who are taught or learned to hate or despise and have pain. Yes, ma'am.
With that being said, I just would like to ask that if anything comes across your desk that strengthens or enforces maybe stronger the punishment for assault on police and fire and first responders. I know on a state and national level they have a team that's gone to Washington and lobbying for stricter laws and maybe even making those crimes federal crimes instead of handled on the state and county level. But I would ask you to look at that and help.
I'm happy to do that and would be predisposed to be supportive of punishment does matter. there is a deterrent aspect to our judicial, our justice system. Kansas City, Kansas, and the Kansas City area participated in Triple Beam, for which you had a press conference a month or so ago, that stepped up law enforcement getting guns and criminals off the street has a huge consequence. The challenge we face differently today is it's not necessarily somebody who committed a crime in the past, it's somebody who's seen something on the internet or met somebody in a bar and they get these thoughts in their heads and become something different than what any human being should be. But I'm happy to do it. I'm in agreement with you and happy to have that look. And if you see anything out there that you think I should be supportive of, please let me know. Yes, sir.
Senator, there's been a lot of discussion lately about term limits. I know that you said at the House. Can you give us some of your perspective on the pluses and minuses of that? Now, I've always been
I have voted for term limits when I was in the House. Those votes come rarely because it would take a constitutional amendment. You'd have to change the Constitution. That requires action by state legislators and by Congress. Those things in today's world would be hard to come by. But I am of the view, or was of the view, that term limits marginally improve the representation in Washington, D.C., and having people whose time, when they have a belief that when they're done in Washington, D.C., they're going to live among the laws and among the people they represented and live under the laws that they passed. I think that's generally a positive thing. But I can certainly make the other argument that that we have term limits. You can vote me and others out of office on an ongoing basis, and it's happening more and more. When I look back at the House of Representatives, I've been gone there 8 years, I hardly know a member of the House of Representatives. The people I serve with no longer are there. They either retired or they were voted out. So there are term limits, and we have that capability, and it's been exercised in Kansas and across the country many times. I also can make the case that if you diminish the service of people who are there and have knowledge and experience, you increase the ability for those in the bureaucracy, within the administration, within the executive branch, to know more, to do more. They're there for careers, and generally you need somebody in Congress who can push back on those that have served in the executive branch as, I don't use the word bureaucrats, as federal employees for a long period of time, and they have the levers that they need to make a difference. So there's a reason that having somebody who knows more is advantageous. And I would say that I don't think we ever want to have term limits in which it doesn't apply to all the country. Kansas, has 4 members of the House of Representatives. California has 53 or 4. So we're at a competitive disadvantage just on numbers. If the Californians could work together, we're outnumbered. I saw that as a state legislator in Topeka, in which generally the issues were rural and urban. More and more urban people. In your case, that was a good thing. But in the case of the country today, more people who represent the coasts are probably not advantageous for people who live in Wyandotte County. So I can make the case both ways, but I would say on the margin, on the slight benefit, term limits make sense to me. I would say that I would address the issue in a different way. I'm not so sure it matters how many years a person stays there if the voters approve his or her service. What I think is the most damning part of service in Congress are people that figure out, and it actually may be worse with term limits, if you figure out how you can make a living when you're done in Congress by being a lobbyist, that changes your attitude, I think, while you serve in Congress. You become the person that is interested in ingratiating him or herself with every other member of Congress, knowing that someday you're going to be knocking on their door on behalf of a client. And it also causes you then to be looking for clients. What business do I want to represent? Who do I want to make happy in case they will hire me? And so I would say, again, I don't know how you change the law. We have a law that prohibits people from becoming lobbyists for a certain period of time. You could do more with that, but I think it's an attitude that says, I can make a lot of money when my term in Congress is over, and once you start thinking that way, then you start behaving that way. And in my view, that's a bigger problem than the length of time that somebody might serve in Congress. Your motivation becomes slightly different than your constituents and becomes a bit more about just what you can do as a career when you're finished. Yes, sir.
The state of Kansas, I believe, produces 35% of the energy produced in Kansas is alternative renewable energy. We also are the fifth largest producer of renewable energy in the country, I believe. In 2022, the subsidies are supposed to run out. Do you see that happening, and do you see the industry standing on its own?
It's a great question. Kansas has been a beneficiary of renewable energy. What's been lacking over time is transmission. That's becoming less of a problem as time goes on. And there has been a philosophical as well as a one kind of energy versus another kind of energy fight for these renewable tax credits. So the American people, you have supported incentives for renewable fuel, and you've done it by those companies paying less taxes as the incentive. Presumably that then benefits the consumer. We can ask the BPU and others about this topic. But I was a supporter and a supporter of that support. A lot of my life is involved, during my life I've been involved in wars in the Middle East. I want us to have a lot less concern about what goes on in Saudi Arabia and Iran and Iraq than we traditionally had to, and it often seemed like it was because that's where our energy came from. So we've now become an exporter of energy. That's been a great turnaround in this country. So we export, we don't consume all we produce, and in part that's been renewable, a large part of it has been natural gas. The fight about whether or not those tax credits should exist resulted in we're going to phase them out, and I supported that. I think at some point in time the renewable fuels, in this case wind, should be able to survive on its own. My impression is they will be capable of doing that, and we'll still see significant resources. We saw this in Kansas, in which they did away with the requirement of utilizing renewable fuel from wind, and we still have a blossoming, growing wind energy. The issue has been more about whether people want the towers, the turbines in their backyard. I used to tell, when I was a congressman, I represented the Flint Hills, they didn't want turbines. And I remember telling my constituents, I understand, if you don't want them here, bring them home to western Kansas where I'm from, we'll be glad to have them. And then there was a 10-year court battle about whether my own county was going to have wind turbines. So I apparently didn't understand all this issue, but I think it's a benefit to the state, and particularly to the agricultural economy. I know I'm in Wyandotte County, and I know I talk a lot about farmers, but on-the-farm income is down 50% since 2013. It's part of what this tariff issue is about, and our ability to have a prosperous state across here, wind and other renewables is an option that has benefit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. They work for you in our offices here in Kansas City, and in my absence, feel free to reach out to them. Both of them are significant experts on issues. Alex was my legislative director in Washington, D.C. He grew up in Prairie Village, wanted to come back home to raise his family, and he was responsible for all of our legislative policies. So while he has an administrative role here, he also knows a lot about issues, bills, legislation. And Joe Badger was our healthcare and education staffer in Washington, D.C. Same thing. His wife's a teacher in the Blue Valley School District. They wanted to come home. And you ought to utilize their expertise, either to get my attention or just learn from them. I discovered becoming a generalist. I used to think I knew as much as my staff did. They probably never thought that was the case. I felt like I did. And now I know something about a lot of things, and these guys know a lot about their things, and so you ought to put them to work on your behalf. And I will listen to what they tell me. You tell them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. 2 reminders, and then Rachel, do we have door prizes? Hey, Rachel?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Door prizes?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And
That's the only reason people stay for
That's
my
it.
remarks.
Just remember, next meeting, September 12th, at Giving the Basics and the festival. We're still looking for sponsors, and the date's October 3rd.
Did everyone get a chance to put your card in? No?